In this short video, we're going to explore building a full-stack application with SAP Cloud Application Programming Model. That's CAP to you and me. And we're going to do this with the help of Joule in SAP Build. Just like you and anyone who wants one, I have a trial account on SAP BTP. Now I've set up SAP Build in this sub-account, following the instructions in the Setup SAP Build in SAP BTP tutorial in the Tutorial Navigator. We can verify our subscription is successful by going to the navigation pane and selecting Services, Instances and Subscriptions. From there, you can make sure that you are subscribed to SAP Business Application Studio and to SAP Build. Click on SAP Build, and the SAP Build lobby opens in a new browser tab. When initially setting up the environment, the needed roles are added to your user in the default IDP. If you're using a custom IDP, for example, because you also set up SAP Build apps, you may need to add the roles SAP Build Administrator and SAP Build Developer. From the SAP Build lobby, click Create, and from the drop-down list, select Create. Under this option, you also have the ability to add existing projects to your SAP Build workspace in the following ways. You can clone an existing project from a Git repository, or you can add a project from an existing SAP Business Application Studio dev space, and this will add it to your SAP Build tenant. Now click on the Application tile. This option will use the SAP Business Application Studio, the SAP Build Pro Code development environment, leveraging the capabilities of services such as Joule for developers. Select the type of application you want to create. Full Stack is used to create an application of type Full Stack with productivity tools. This will enable you to develop, extend, and deploy your application. You can provide the application with a desktop or a mobile UI. Front-end allows you to build UI using Freestyle SAP UI5 or SAP Fiori Elements. Or finally, select Mobile, which is used to customize, deploy, and manage your iOS or Android apps in the cloud. If you've selected a full-stack application, choose Node, Java, or ABAP as your development stack. Name your project. Then, select the development space where you want the project to reside. SAP Build recommends the development space it deems most suitable, and will automatically create a new one for you if you don't already have one. If you have other development spaces of the same type, for example, another full-stack dev space, you can select between them here. If you want to create a different dev space or a dev space of another type, go to the Dev Space Manager. See the tutorial working in the Dev Space Manager for more details. Finally, hit Create. You will see the project being created in the project table of the lobby. The creation of the project may take a few moments to complete. After you see a message stating that the project has been created successfully, click the project to open it. The project opens in SAP Business Application Studio, the SAP Build Pro Code development environment. Let's make things clear here. The SAP Business Application Studio is the web-based interactive development environment that we already know and love. SAP Build, therefore, is a bundle of features and services based upon that. One of those key features in SAP Build that we'll be using in this project in particular is Joule. Opening the Joule view gives us the ability to enter something quite high level into the prompt. using the /cap gen app command, which we'll do now to kick things off. Notice that this action is then split by Joule into 3 multiple steps: the data model, the sample data, and the application logic. These can all be then addressed separately if you need to. Not only is this approach a little cleaner, but it allows us to control the execution of each step, optionally enhancing the generated prompts as we see fit. Actually, let's do that right now. Let's start by changing the prompt for the generate cap data model, and instead modify the data model in a couple different ways. We want to define 4 data entries. We want each customer must have the following fields and add specific fields. Each product should have a name, description, price. Let's change a couple of the data types. For instance, redemptions must have one field that is an integer type. And let's also say each purchase must be associated to a product, and that is called selected product. We'll also tell it to use associations instead of compositions. Now, just a quick word on that last change that we made there. The constraint, the links between the entities in our data model, they're going to be better modeled as associations rather than compositions. And compositions are more for a contained in type of relationship. We want to express that explicitly here, which is what a domain expert would do as they're refining what's generated by Joule. Okay, so now the model has been generated, so we can take a quick look at what's been built so far. The language of the CDS model is, of course, CDL, with which we have an entity definition at the DB layer, service definitions at the SRV layer, and also some annotations at the app layer. Those annotations will be used to drive the Fiori Elements front-end components of what we'll end up with as well. So that's the first step done. Now let's have Joule generate some sample data for us. Again, Joule has already suggested some detail, but let's modify that to be more specific within our constraints and to align with the new entities we've asked for. Note the generated data looks a bit scary at first, but if you stare at it long enough, you'll realize that it's not. In fact, the hexadecimal values there are actually GUIDs, because the primary key for each entity are defined as such, and not like, say, integers, because the generated model uses best practices. What else would you expect? Let's finish off this phase by dealing with the application logic. Just like before, we can and will modify the suggested prompt for the final step to make the requirements a little more precise and detailed. Let's change the prompt for generate cap application logic to add reward points for each purchase that will be 1/10 of the purchase value. Each purchase value will be added to the total purchase value of the related customer. Each reward point will be added to the total reward points of the related customer. And finally, let's deduct the redemption amount from the customer's total reward points and add that to the total redeemed points. At this point, we have some code. Note that what's generated is actually split up across multiple files, a modularization feature that we as developers should appreciate. Let's have a look at it. Note that the accept button is significant here. We're still the developer in control, and only upon accepting the generated content is it actually brought into our project. See how we have 5 level modules along the lines of different phase handling within the logic? And while we're in the editor here, note that the Joule features aren't limited to model and code generation. We can, for example, modify and extend what we get. For instance, I could use the refactor feature or perhaps get some code explanation using the add comment feature. Let's zoom out a bit to get a better view of what we have now. We can do that either via the storyboard, which gives us a way into the data model and service-related components, or we can use the more hierarchical or tree depiction from the project overview view. And while we're in a more graphical frame of mind, we can also open up a graphical view of the data model with the graphical modeler. This is available from pretty much anywhere, including the code editor. Let's quickly examine what that looks like. By the way, there's also a great spreadsheet style view of the sample data, where you can, of course, also quite comfortably modify and add to what we have already generated. Now we want to add authentication to our application, and this can be done easily by using the define user role from the storyboard. This will open the authorization editor, where we can define specific authorizations and roles at the service or the entity level. If I look at my customer entity, we can see that it currently needs the authenticated user only. I can go ahead and add a new role specific to this one entity. I'm going to name this role support, and I'm going to give it full access to all the CRUD, create, read, update, delete operations on this single entity. From here, I can also see the code that was generated. I can see additional conditions that I can attach to the role, or I can assign another built-in role. So now I'm going to look at the service level itself. The service currently requires an authenticated user. I want to change this so that any user without authentication can also access this service. So I'll add the any user, and then I'll simply delete the authenticated user role because having them both would be detrimental. It wouldn't make sense. So now I have a service that can be accessed without authentication, but I need a special role with authentication to access the customer entity. As we see here, the product entity only requires the any user role. And here I've switched into the code display, and I can see the annotations that have been generated in CDS syntax to define the security that I've just set up. Now that we have our base CAP application that's been generated for us using Joule, we've added authentication, we've built other capabilities, we want to connect to our S4 system that we're going to extend and use a service from S4 in our application. To do that, we're going to add an external service. And this is going to bring up the service center, where we can go to the business accelerator hub or do the connections that we've set up for our particular environment. I'm going to go here and I'm going to choose S/4HANA Public Cloud. That's the system that I'm going to connect to. And then from there, I narrowed down the search to sales because I want to pull in sales order information. I can view all the entities. I can even preview the data from here. I can see the properties on a particular entity, the diagram of the entity. And I know that this is the content that I want to see. So I can just add this to my project, and now it's going to show up as an external resource in the storyboard. You can see the sales order A2X. I can view the diagram of the content. And here we can see all the entities and their properties again, very much like we saw it in the Service Center Explorer. Now I return to the storyboard and I have my external resource, but now I need to expose that through my service interface in my CAP application. And to do that, I want to open the service definition in the graphical modeler. And now I want to add a projection on that external resource. That's going to add the entity of the external resource to my service interface. So I don't need draft enablement, but I can come here and I see all the entities that are part of my external service. And I'm going to take just the base sales order. And by default, it adds all the properties, but I'm going to choose just a few of them that I need in my particular extension application. I could also rename these properties at this point as well. You see the little pencil next to the field name that would allow me to create an external name that's different than the name of the service. But I'm going to keep it 1-to-1 for now. The names all work for me. I'll accept that. And now that is embedded in my service. Well, now that we have this projection entity as part of our service, we actually need some logic to implement it. Now, by default, this entity would not return any data. We need to code the connection to call the remote S4 service behind the scenes. Now, luckily, there's a built-in wizard that uses Joule functionality to do a lot of the code generation for us. We simply have to tell it where we want to put this logic. So we want it to be read operations, and we want it to take place before the service call. This will open the application editor for us, and we see that we have the Joule prompt opened automatically. We have the ability to use Joule to generate the logic that we'll need to call the backend remote service. So here I'm going to use the cap app logic prompt. And now we have to tell it what we want it to do. And I've pre-prepared a little prompt here. We tell it that we want to create an event handler that connects to the external service. Now I need to edit the name of the external service here because in my example, I use a slightly different name than where I got this prompt example from. But we tell it the name of the external service, that we want it to use CDS Connect, that we want to retrieve the sales order entity from the external service, and we want to use, we want to check that there's an existing select object that exists in the incoming request, modify the query to sort the results by create date in descending order, and limit the results to the top 300 records if there's no limit already built in. And here we can see that Joule has turned our English description of what we wanted into the source code using the CDS APIs to call the remote service. I can go ahead and accept that code that is generated, and it brings it into the code editor where I could further edit it. If maybe the Joule generation didn't get it exactly right, or maybe I now decide I want some additional criteria as part of this logic, I can go ahead and edit it. But now I have logic in this event handler to call the remote S4 service. It was very easy to connect up, bring in the definition of the S4 service, and with the help of Joule, generate the source code necessary to wire my projection in my service interface into the remote S4 service. This is a good point to test and make sure that all the wiring to our S4 system is working. We can test very easily by starting the application directly within the build development environment. This is going to run our service application locally and bring up a little test tool. And we can come directly here to the A sales order entity that we've exposed to our service. And we see that it's returning data. And that data is coming from the remote S4 system. So in a matter of moments, we've been able to wire everything up, and we have a running service locally. We can see in the log here that it's hitting the remote sandbox API on the S4HANA cloud system. And we know everything is working exactly as we want it to. What we saw previously was just the test user interface. But now we want to generate a Fiori UI by using the Create UI Application wizard in SAP Code. This is going to generate all the Fiori annotations for a full Fiori user interface for us. So we'll begin with just a few details about our application, what we want it named, and the description. And we'll choose the data source. So we want our CAP service to be the main data source of this application. What type of application do we want? Do we want a template-based responsive Fiori UI, or do we want a mobile-centric freestyle application? So I'm going to choose a Fiori application based upon one of the templates. And let's go with let's go with the list report object page template. And here we have to choose our main entity. So we're going to go with sales orders because we just want a little UI that's going to let us preview the sales order information that we're going to tie into our application. And I'll go with the defaults here. And what you'll see is it'll take a second for it to be generated, but now it's visible here in our storyboard and our project overview. We can see some of the settings about the application that's been built, particularly the page map. We can see our list report, our object page, and we can change some of the default settings in this nice properties view that will, behind the scenes, generate all the appropriate Fiori annotations for us. Let's test our application again so we can see this newly generated UI. Now, I could run it from the top where I did before, or I can go to Run Configurations and choose from different pre-built configurations. I'm going to start it that way this time. We're going to get the same results. It's going to start the CAP application, and as soon as it's running, it will open the preview tool in another tab. But this time, we're going to see that we have a little Fiori launchpad built into the preview, and it has our Fiori application in it. And here's our sales order app UI. If I hit go, it will query the S4 system. And here we see the data coming back from the backend S4 system already in a nice Fiori UI. But the Joule capabilities don't end here. We can also use Joule to enhance the already generated UI. So I'm going to ask it to create a new Fiori Elements app with a list object page floor plan that starts with a list of customers, but then allows me to jump into their sales information. And with just that simple description of what I want the UI to do, Joule and the Fiori templates have generated my application that combines both the data from S4 as well as my custom entities that I've defined in my CAP application. Now that we have our finished application, we're ready to deploy it to SAP BTP Cloud Foundry. We'll use the Task Explorer and one of the built-in tasks to both enable discovery of our service and to deploy the project to SAP BTP. The project will be built and then an archive created, an MTAR, a multi-target application archive. And this will all be sent to BTP so that we can run it there. And all this is done from the single task definition. Now, at this point, the deployment actually pauses for a moment. It needs to log into Cloud Foundry to deploy our application. So I'm going to go back to the BTP cockpit, and I need to look up the API endpoint of my sub-account so that I can put that in so it knows where to connect to. Now, actually, the default value for me was correct, but I always like to check it just in case. And then I'll use the SSO option. I'll actually authenticate in a web browser. That way I don't have to put in my username and password. It's going to give me a temporary code that I can put in for authentication. That only lasts a few seconds, so it's even safe to show here in the video. Now, it's connecting mean it needs to know my Cloud Foundry organization, which I can have multiple of in a sub account, and my space. Now that I've authenticated and I told it the target of where I want to deploy, it can continue with the deployment. Now, my deployment actually failed. This is a great learning experience. Up to this point, I haven't needed a HANA Cloud database. I'm able to test my CAP application without it. But to actually deploy to Cloud Foundry, I'm going to need a HANA database to deploy my entities as database tables into. Now, at this point, I need to create an instance of the HANA Cloud database. And for BTP, I've launched the HANA Cloud tools, which has a wizard that lets me quickly create a HANA Cloud database instance. Here I am in a trial account, so I'm limited to the size of the HANA database, but I get a full private HANA Cloud database instance for myself that I can play around with. I have full administrative rights and access to this database. And it only takes a few minutes and answering a couple questions in order to get this HANA database created. Now, very important, I want to set allow all IP addresses. This is going to allow us to be able to connect to this HANA database also from the Business Application Studio if we want to do testing or development against it. And after double checking all the settings, I'll go ahead and start the creation process, and this will take a couple of minutes to complete. So now that my HANA database is running, I'll return and restart the deployment. And we'll give it a couple seconds here to redeploy. And I actually see that I'm getting an error message. It wasn't able to create the service instance. There's another thing that I forgot, and this is very important, a common mistake. When I first initialized my HANA database, I did not set up the instance mapping, which is how we tell the HANA database which Cloud Foundry org and space we want it connected to. So I'll just return to the HANA Cloud Central and my already running database, and I can very simply edit the configuration. So I'll go here to Manage Configuration. I'll go to Instance Mapping, and I'll add a Cloud Foundry mapping. And I only had to put in the organizational ID as the environment instance, and then it'll be available to all spaces within that org. I'll restart the HANA database, which takes a couple of seconds. And now that it's connected to my Cloud Foundry, org, and space, I should be able to return to the Business Application Studio and start my deployment again. I'll kick it off. It'll have to rebuild the application. And there it is, all built. And now it is deploying the archive once again. And this time, it's going to be successful, which means it's going to take a couple seconds longer. And we can see what it's doing. It's creating the service instances for the security, the UAA, the HANA database, HDI container instance, the destination connectivity to the S4 system, the logging service. It did all this for us. We didn't have to get into the details of creating any of that. And now it's actually deploying the service, the application router for the user interface, and the database deployer is deployed and running and creating the HANA database HDI container and all the contents in it, the tables and views. And we see we have a successful deployment to SAP BTP. Our application is now running. We even have the URL to the Launchpad to test it. If we run the Launchpad application, we see that it opens in a browser window, and we have both the tiles for our two Fiori Elements applications, our sales order application for viewing the sales orders from the S4 backend, as well as our custom entities that we defined in our CAP application that then navigate to the appropriate sales order applications. We can also look at what was created in the SAP HANA Cloud Database instance. If I go to the Database Explorer, I can create a new connection specifically for the HDI container that was generated when I deployed the application. I have to fill in the connection information, but we can get all that from the service key in the BTP cockpit. So I'll come here to Instances and Subscriptions, and I see the database container instance that was created when I deployed. And I'll just copy this configuration JSON, and I'll paste it directly here in the add instance of the Database Explorer. And when I connect to that, now I've got the ability to view everything that was created in this container. So for instance, I can come here and I can see all the tables that were created. Notice there's no sales order table because that was just a projection on the S4 entity. But all the custom tables that I defined specifically to my extension are here in the HANA Cloud Database instance. And I have the ability to view the data. There is no data in here yet. It's a newly deployed application. But I could generate some SQL and even preview the data in different ways from here. So this just shows you the complete round trip of building an application in SAP code and fully deploying and testing it.